In this video, I'll be explaining to you about context. Context is probably one of the most confusing concepts in web dev, but it's actually very simple, and I'll be using an analogy to explain it. So what is context? Context provides a way for us to share the states and function globally. So sometimes in web dev, you will come across a situation where you need to use the states and functions in many different components. And sometimes these components don't even connect to each other. So in this example, I'll be using model component, login model and register model. So for example, when the user tries to access the protected page and they are not signed in, a login model will pop out. In an e-commerce website, the user tries to like the product and they are not signed in, a login model will pop out. When the user tries to sign in and they're actually a first-time user and they never registered before, register model will pop out. So this model will be used in many different places. So it's very difficult to maintain the states of this model when they are used in many different components. One way to do it is to manage the states in the highest parent component and then pass it down to the targeted component. So if the nested component is deep, then you have to keep passing down through the props. And you have to pass down to the children, to the children, to the children. And this is what we call as a prop drilling. So prop drilling is not a good thing because it's very difficult to manage and also very difficult to read. So one way to share the states or function through many different places without passing them down as a prop is actually by using context. So context can be divided into three parts. The first part will be the context itself that we created through the create context. The second part will be the provider component, and the third part will be the use context. So the first part is the context. If I were to give an analogy, they are like a pipeline. They provide a way to connect the states and function to the children component. And the second part, the provider, is like the water tank. This is the component that manage the state and then function that we want to pass down to the children. So the states and then the function, even though it's used in many different components, it will be synchronized because it will be managed in this one component only. So this is where the source coming from. This is like the water tank. And we want to pass down the states and then the function to the children component. So without context, we have to pass them down as a props. But using context, we don't have to pass them down as props. We can pass them down through the model context.provider, which is a pipeline, right? So this is the water tank. The context is like a pipeline, passing down all these state and then function to the children. So all the children component of the provider component can access the states and then the function. So one way to ensure that the most number of component to be the children component of the provider component is by putting it at the highest parent component, which is at the root layout itself. Here we import the model provider and then we put it at the highest level. So all the children of the root layout, including the nav, is the children of the provider component. All of them can access the states and then the function of the provider component. Now that we already have the water tank and the pipeline, how do we access the states and then the function from the targeted component? By using the use context. So in the targeted component, you import the use model here that using use context, and then you extract the states and then the function that you need in this component. So you do not need to extract all of them. You extract only the one that you need in this component. In this component, the one that we need is open login states and then the close login model function. So in this component, the one that we need is open register state and close register model function. In the user menu, we need to open register model and open login model. So in summary, context can be divided into three parts. The context part that will act like a pipeline. The model provider part, the provider component part that will act like a water tank, which manages all the sources, the states and then the function, and pass down to the children to the context pipeline. And the use context part that acts like a faucet, where we can extract the states and then where we can extract the states and function that pass down. So that's the simplest way to understand the context.